This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders who are designing the future. Well, I'm Joe Pardavila, and today's guest challenges the idea that hard work alone leads to promotions. Jissan Cherian is the author of the new book, Hack the Corporate Learning Curve, where he breaks down how visibility, perception, and personal branding shape career growth inside organizations. This is a conversation about why high performers sometimes get overlooked, why others rise faster, and what you need to change to move forward. Jissan, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, Joe. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. And so I always start these podcasts with something that's been gnawing at me because I love having experts on this because they can hopefully help me. And it's not something I need to go to ChatGPT for. But I've been fascinated as someone who has, been a news junkie, followed the media, followed heads of corporations. And this idea of failing upward has always been something that drives me crazy. And I don't, and the reason I want to ask you this is this a real thing or is this just look optically like someone is failing upward? Because I remember for years, I'm going to say his name, Jeffrey Zucker at NBC, he kept failing and failing, and they kept giving him like bigger titles and more power. He ended up eventually running CNN, and he got ousted for some stuff we're not going to get into. But he was one of those people that I saw like, wait a minute. So the ratings are going down. They're not making as much money, but they keep giving him more responsibilities and bigger title. And I know, again, I don't know if this is an optic thing, Jason, where maybe on the outside it looks like that, but tell me about this idea of failing upward. Is it real?
No, I think failing upward is an interesting perception versus reality thing, right? So when you look at someone who's been potentially on the decline, but somehow find their way moving up in their organization, or even in the example that we provided, I think failing upward is based on the perception of what you've seen. So I would assume, giving people the benefit of the doubt, that what they do behind the camera or what they're doing in the back rooms, the leadership, potentially the way they think about building organizations, the culture that they're building, perhaps those are the things that are kind of giving them the opportunity to fail upward. But yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, right? And I think there really are networks. There's kind of professional, political kind of relationships and things like that that can also enable certain things to kind of fail upward. But look, I always give it the benefit of the doubt. There's got to be some value that they bring to the table that perhaps we just don't see.
So it's not like, there's the old joke of they must have photographs of someone, that old thing. So it's not that. It's just that we're not seeing exactly what they're doing behind the scenes. So, okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, the premise of like personal branding and how we always think about it is like reality is perception and perception is reality. So if you're not talking about the things and you're not intentional about what you're putting out there, then people will make their own judgments about who you are, what you are. Perhaps what we see is what their complete self is when it may only be a representation, a small portion of who they really are, right? So hopefully it gives us a little bit of kind of optimism
Yeah.
and a little bit of like grace for each other. But yeah, it's interesting. I don't think it's ever a pure definitive yes or no answer.
And speaking on the optimistic part, I sometimes look at promotions pessimistically because I came from a world where in lieu of pay, they'll give you a bigger title. They'll add an S to the VP, or they'll give you a manager title, a director title. And so often if we just to lighten the mood when people have promotions, I'm like, so is that in lieu of pay? Tell me about this idea of moving upward, but not affecting actually like what you're taking home.
Yeah, I think we always have to be realistic with ourselves. And look, I'm always going to talk from the place of the conversations you need to have with your manager. You need to be clear on where you are in your life and what the expectations are, right? So I think a lot of times people are afraid to ask for salary, ask for money, ask for kind of those compensation because it feels very selfish. It's like I should be appreciative that you're giving me this big opportunity and it's a nice title. But I think if your family needs it and it's needed at home, it's an honest conversation you have with people. And there's usually some sort of way to kind of get some version of a compensation, a one-time payment, whatever. Let's put that aside, right? But I do think that the ways people should be navigating their careers is more tied to an accumulation of experiences. And perhaps that comes with title, but more important is the lessons learned and the things you're going to carry on to future jobs. Because I eventually believe law of averages, like eventually the money will come. So perhaps it's not this promotion, but the opportunity and the door that it puts you in, the seat you're sitting at alongside other leaders, that access to that network, the ability to work on things you haven't been able to work on before, that should open the door to eventually that big compensation raise that people are looking at. But you got to look at it in terms of the length of time you're looking outward. If you're looking only outward the next 12 months, it will feel very frustrating, and rightfully so. It might be frustrating, right? But if you start to think about it, okay, what's the next role after this, and what's two roles after that, then you start to think about this as, well, this is an investment in myself. I'm going to go accumulate all these resources, all this knowledge. I'm going to build these networks, and it's actually the second move after this that's going to be the big payout. And I think it takes maturity, because if you're early in your career, you don't have that perspective. If you're maybe a lot later in your career, you're jaded because you've been waiting and waiting and it doesn't happen, right? But I think it's the human nature of it all.
Nice, and that dovetails beautifully into the subject matter of your book, and you argue that performance alone is not enough for career growth. What do most people misunderstand about how promotions actually happen?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that people don't really perceive is what is happening in the back rooms when people are having conversations. And I don't think people realize how much individuals are carried through by their manager's perception of you in those conversations, right? So let's take, for example, what talent reviews are. So you have your leadership team, you have multiple departments talking about the individuals in the organization, and they are relying on your manager to basically be your representative in the room because you're not there. So then what people often overlook is, well, I churned out 15 projects and my manager said they all were delivered on time exactly as I expected. But what you don't understand is the questions that are being asked of the manager is not what's the volume of work that they've created. It's what's their impact on culture? How much do they understand our strategy and our enterprise? Are they willing to try and help out with other projects beyond just the stuff that they're being assigned? So the nuance of what's being asked about you isn't necessarily just a productivity question. Like, are you maximizing the amount of work per minute that you're at the office? That seems like a very elementary way of thinking about it. But when you get into those conversations, your managers are having much more robust conversations. Now, if all you're if all you've done is communicate the amount of work you've done, and all of your conversations with your manager have been transactional, when that time comes for them to give a report or a narrative of who you are, it is a dictation of exactly what you conveyed to them. It's incredibly responsible. They get all their projects done really on time. How's your leadership skills? Well, we haven't seen that necessarily, but I can give them 16 projects and they'll all get done by the end of the month. Well, that's not exactly what we're looking for in this next role, right? And that's what people realize, and they come back and they say, well, I didn't get that promotion, or I didn't get that opportunity. Well, maybe I need to do 18 projects, not 16. Maybe I need to keep cranking out more output because productivity is seen as the ultimate thing. But everyone is getting their job done. It's who are those individuals that have a little special spark.
So there is a bit of a catch-22 to that, Justin, because of the fact that, what if it's not just about the volume? Like, what if the people are just working at their capacity and they can't reach that higher volume? But like you said, they're doing a great job. They're impressing. How do you thread that needle of not being able? Because I have this theory, just in that in this day and age, Western cultures, most people that work in white collar jobs are surviving and not thriving. So there's this idea of just getting by, and then so the idea of hitting that number, or maybe not hitting that number, but also but doing it at a really high level. How do you cross that?
Yeah, I think it has to start with honest conversations between the manager and the employee, or let's just say any relationship. I think it always has to start with honest conversation around what your expectations are of yourself in the job, and then your manager giving you clear expectations of, well, here's my expectations of you in this role. Now, if the individual is trying to become something much bigger, they're trying to become a leader within the organization, they're asking questions that are different than someone who may be seeing themselves as kind of, this is my gig. This is what I come in for, and I walk out and I'm not trying to get advanced, right? The difference is the people that are looking to get progressed are actually asking questions about, how does this project fit into the enterprise strategy? If I delay this, what are the teams are impacted? If someone is not necessarily making those bigger enterprise connections, they're thinking about their work as transactional. Hey, it hit my desk. My job's to get it off my desk to the next person's, right? And that conversation can sometimes trigger or signal to the manager that you're happy and content with your role in the organization. And I think it's also important for us to acknowledge that not everyone is set up or has the desire to want to be a people manager or the head of a department or the head of a company. Some people just want to be really good at their job and they want to be able to coach their, son's soccer league, and they want to be able to do the cool stuff on the weekends that they want to do. And they don't want to necessarily put in that extra whatever it is to get to that next level. That's okay. I think managers and employees need to have that honest conversation with each other. Then we're being measured off the same grading sheet, if you think, right? Now, if your manager thinks you're trying to progress to the next level of leadership and you have no desire, and that is never communicated, there's always going to be a misinterpretation of productivity. Your manager is always going to think you're underperforming because they're expecting you to step up, and you're always under delivering because you're only doing the amount that you wanted, right? So honestly, I think it starts with honest conversations. Now, if there's a straight up disagreement in terms of your potential, I think then that's the conversation you need to have about, are you in the right place? Because sometimes maybe you had a couple of missteps in your career early on, and for some reason that's still sticking with you. It's part of your identity in the organization. You can't shake it off. And no matter what you kind of do, it feels like you're still being judged by that. Then I think it's important to say, okay, it's time for me to get a fresh start somewhere else and not lose my aspirations, right? The worst thing you could do is resign and kind of say, okay, well, I'm just going to be stuck in this role. I'm not going to expect much from my leadership and my organization, and I'm not going to expect that much from myself. And I'm just going to go home. And it gets hard to get to work every day when you have that mentality.
Nice, that's good stuff. All right, so I hate to ask the cliche question about like, tell me about the title of the book, but we really can't continue the discussion without talking about the title of the book, which is Hack the Corporate Learning Curve. Tell me what that means in practical sense, hacking that curve that we've sort of been dancing around the last few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, throughout my entire career, so I've done 20 years between, I started off in tech, I went over to consulting, and then I did consumer healthcare, kind of CPG, traditional marketing. During that entire time, there was always this conversation around, you step into a new role, there's a learning curve, right? There's essentially a period of time that you're given, where you can ask dumb questions, you can, kind of work on projects slowly
Make
because you're
mistakes.
learning. Yeah, you even get the, hey, introduce yourself. Hi, I've been here 3 months. And you kind of go out of your way to point out the fact that you're new because it's almost like a defense mechanism, right? And the idea is that everyone follows the same path on that learning curve, and it takes you 4 months, and then you start to implement something. Your manager starts to notice you. But what I kind of, tackled in the premise of this book was, why does that learning curve have to be a standard way every single time? So as you move in your career and get more opportunities to start off new jobs, start a new role, career, whatever it is, you should know pretty quickly, what do you need on day one? What do you need in week one? What do you need in 3 weeks? Who are the people that and support that you're expecting? What kind of manager style works best for you? How do you learn? So you can proactively ask for the things that you know works best for you, as opposed to waiting for someone to give you the onboarding and the training for the job. It's, you start to ask for the things you need very early. And then the question is, why stay silent? Just because you've only been in the organization for 6 weeks doesn't mean you can start pondering questions, asking questions, starting to build a little bit of a personal brand. So the whole premise of this is that there are specific tips and tricks and hacks on what you can do, whether it's, the awareness of who you are within the organization, the type of work you sign up for, the network you build, the relationships you start to nurture. All of that accelerates your business impact. So all of a sudden you compress the learning curve, right? So whereas your peer set might take 6 months to kind of make a business impact, maybe you're doing it in 3 months, which essentially makes you stand out, right? And that's what's kind of cool. But it's all built on self-awareness and you learning, right? It's not about the egotistical, who's the loudest in the room, who's the one kind of telling stories about their previous, careers and how amazing it was and everyone's rolling their eyes. It's not that. It's literally, how self-aware are you on what it takes to be successful, and how quickly are you asking for those things proactively versus waiting for the organization to kind of put it in front of you and set you up.
So in a way, you are shrinking that timetable of advancement when you're joining an organization. But at what point is it healthy or unhealthy to look at the speed of which you're moving things up? You talk about the fact like that you're cutting that learning curve where as opposed to them having like a 6 month honeymoon phase, they've dropped it down to a couple months. Does that then sometimes make you be like, okay, I've cut down the learning curve, I'm kicking butt. I should get promoted within the 6 months of me being in this company. Like, how do you frame that in a way that it's healthy? Because again, not every company moves in that fashion where it's like, oh my god, that this person, we didn't realize this guy's not just an A player, he's an A plus player. We got to advance them. Tell me about how you handle that time frame within your own brain if you are following these steps to hack your way along that curve.
Yeah, and I think it's different based on the life or the career stage you're in, right? So the way that I've written the book is that there's actually 5 personas or 5 stages. So it really depends on what kind of experience you're bringing to the table on day 1. So if you're brand new in your career, hacking the corporate learning curve is understanding the dynamics of working in corporate and understanding who's, the different leaders I need to be aware of. And I work in marketing, but what are the other departments that I need to interact with? It's very rudimental and like basic, but for a lot of people coming out of college, they may take 8, 9 months to kind of figure that out. So then the difference is just a matter of how quickly you can get up to speed. Now, if you're someone that's had a track record of success, let's assume you're 15, 20 years into your career, it's a very different learning curve where you might have a team alongside a leadership team that you're a part of, and you're now hacking the corporate learning curve in the sense of how do you know your team as best as possible? Are they working on the right projects? Is your leadership aware of you? Do you need a sponsor within the organization? So it's a different playbook essentially based on that. So it's essentially a book of 5 different playbooks. Now, the question that you asked was specifically around the idea of, well, shouldn't I be expected to be promoted very quickly? I think promotion is one ultimate, kind of a goal that we all have. But I think the bigger unlock in the book is that there's ways to define being recognized. So I think the biggest one is, are you being picked to brainstorm on really challenging topics on the business? Are people going out of their way to build teams where they want to include you in it? Are you getting the biggest enterprise project, the biggest priority that the president is talking about that we got to accomplish this year? You happen to be working on it. So it's all of those elements that signal that the organization has recognized you, they see you as talent, and the speed at which you got up to speed is important. But once you get into those bigger projects, we get into the tips and tricks of like, how do you tackle that project? How do you make the most of it? How do you start talking about what your previous experiences were as you're providing input into your existing job? Because people only know who you are as of the time that they've met you. They don't know the 14 years of experience you brought to the table. So it's almost
Right.
your job to have stories. And personal branding is also a collection of your personal stories, right? It's your storybook. So when you're tackling a project, it's like, you know what? A few years ago, I tackled the same thing. Here's what we noticed. Here's what we did. Should we try something like this? Now, all of a sudden, you're being valued not only with what you bring to the table here, but all the vast knowledge that you have. And I think a lot of times people forget that storytelling matters. Like people remember those things in conference rooms when someone makes a point because they've seen it before, right? And I think a lot of us, we forget to make that connection. We just go straight into, hey, let's try this. It's like, hey, good luck. Like, why do you believe that's true? It's like, what experience do you have being able to recommend that? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's funny. Yeah, I want to double click on branding because as a card carrying member of Generation X, the idea of a human being a brand is very weird. Like I grew up as a brand is Pepsi, a brand is McDonald's, but and trust me, I'm not an idiot. I get the idea of personal branding and how important it is. But tell me how that works in a corporate setting. Like I know just obviously working with authors every day and building their authority, I get the idea of why you want to be a personal brand when it comes to thought leadership. But tell me, how do you build a brand within a company without stepping on people's toes, without becoming bigger than the company? Because I think that's the dance I think a lot of high performing individuals have to take part of is like they have this story, but their story can't be bigger than the team or the people around them. Tell me about that importance of brand because it's a big part of the book. So tell me about why it's so important when it comes to this hacking this curve.
Yeah, absolutely. So, personal branding is the way that you become not one of the many cogs in the wheel of corporate machine, right? I think a lot of the frustration that we see with all generations right now is that they don't feel valued, they feel replaceable, they don't feel like they have an identity. They're more of this kind of thing that shows up, keeps the machine moving, but if they were to drop off, someone would just drop in and continue on, right? I think that's the premise that everyone's operating in. Personal branding is really this opportunity, and I go back to self-awareness because it starts with knowing what your strengths are. Now, I do this with the company that I currently work at, the department. We actually went through a process where everyone took an assessment and found out what their top 5 natural strengths are. Once you identify that, then all of a sudden everyone has a different perception of you because you lead with what I'm naturally good at. Now, it's not egotistical. It's just self-awareness. It doesn't have a matter of your title or your years of experience. It's just this is what you're naturally strong at. Once we do that, then it's a matter of, okay, then what experiences do you bring to the table? What previous roles have you had? And being able to kind of articulate what would be the key stories that you would want people to know about you. And again, this is very much a self-awareness exercise. This is sitting by yourself, kind of deliberately choosing, you know what, I really want people to know this about me because that's why I lead the way that I do, or that's why I show up in the office the way I do. Now, once you do that, then there's a really tactical and tasteful way to do that in the marketplace, right? Or in the corporate world, because this is where you get the egotistical stereotype of this person's all about themselves. They're not a team player. They're only talking about their personal brand. But the key is understanding what the enterprise priorities are in the corporate strategy and then tying your strengths to their needs. And I think that's the disconnect that sometimes we don't have, where we're ready to talk about ourselves regardless of what the company's trying to accomplish, right? And then all of a
Right.
sudden it's like you're a one in the sea of people, but it feels like you're on your own mission. You're kind of an army of one in it for yourself. If you go and take your strengths and tie it into the top two enterprise important initiatives that the president's talking about, you're seen as very much a team player, but you have a specialized set of skills that sets you apart from the others. So I think it's the intelligence of knowing what's important in your organization and then finding a way to translate your strengths to that. Because now you're working on projects that tie to your strengths and to the enterprise priority. And the more that happens, the more often it happens, you become kind of an identity within the company. It's like, yeah, well, we can't be this company without this person because look at how many times they've, leveraged their strengths and moved our initiatives forward. Right. So that's kind of the little dance you got to do, and that's what the book goes into.
All right, so I want to ask on my own personal kind of foibles is, and I joke with people I work with all the time is my problem is, I mean, I'm sure I'm a pain in the ass to people, but my problem is that what I do, I make it look easy on the surface. So people may not know how much actually goes into it because I'm sort of like, like what would it say, ducks? Like ducks above the water, their head are sticking up, but their feet are freaking flying like crazy. And that's sort of how I've always worked. Like my feet are going below the surface and no one sees that. Use me as an example. Like, how do I show the company that, man, what I do is really, really hard, but everyone seems to think it's quite easy. Any advice for someone like me? I'm sure I'm not the only idiot out there who has this issue of like trying, who makes their job look easy to others.
No, I think it's human nature, and I think we're all in that same situation right now. I think first of all, the first question that I always ask is, okay, is your level of effort also seen as what your manager would consider to be the right level of effort for the job, right? So, for example, someone who's unprepared, not they don't have their skills in the right place, they might be desperately running as hard as they can to get the
Right.
job done, but it's actually because of a lack of knowledge, lack of experience, lack of understanding. Let's assume that's not the case, right? Let's
Right.
assume you have the right profile, you're in the right place, you're just making the effort look effortless, right? The job is effortless. What I've seen in successful people is that you go to your manager and you start to offer yourself as a mentor or a coach to others. Basically, you say, hey, the reason why this is effortless to me is because I've learned this, this, and this. Can I go and actually coach up my peer? Or is there someone in the organization that needs that kind of support? And then all of a sudden it becomes this, yeah, we don't need to know you're working tirelessly because you're actually teaching others how to do the same thing. So now again, as an organization, you look for people that have this interest in wanting to coach and mentor and build up others. And eventually it also signals that you might be ready to be a people leader, like a team leader. Without ever asking to be a team leader. You ask to start coaching and mentoring people. Naturally, going back to that talent conversation, when your manager starts to describe you, they're going to talk about the effortless work and how many projects you're cranking out. Oh, by the way, he's also, mentoring two people on the team that's more junior, and I'm starting to see performance improve on them. Now, like, what a narrative to have in a room where you're not there, right? Because of that.
That's great. Great free advice. I appreciate it, Justin. Let me ask you about the idea of people not being prepared for the promotion because I had an executive I worked with years ago. He said, I went to a longtime employee who's with me for like a decade, and I said, you know what, you've been working so hard. I feel like it's time for you to move forward and have this managerial position. And the person was like, okay, great. How do I do that? And I think that's one of the things that people I think everyone's experienced this idea of like when someone works at a certain level and then they get placed in a leadership position, they may not they're really good at what they do, but then you try to transfer those skills to the management side. They're not prepared for it because for whatever reason, maybe the company doesn't have a lot of, you know, personal development behind the scenes that they're promoting or stuff like that. But you hear it all the time about people that get elevated to positions, but then not actually prepared to hold that position. How do people, if they follow your path and they're hacking this curve, the idea of once they're moving up this curve, they're getting more responsibilities, but along the way they may not be prepared for it. How do they prepare for it once they're working their way up that curve?
Yeah, I think it's very common, right? And I think it's this interpretation that because you're a great individual contributor and you're knocking out the work that you can scale this up to a team of 6 and now you can lead a team where you're not actually doing the work, you're depending on other people to do your work. And then there's this real self-reflection on perfectionism because now you don't actually control the quality of what's delivered. You got to expect your team to deliver it, but you're on the hook and your name's tied to the quality. So there's a lot of people that struggle with ownership, micromanagement. So they end up doing the work or making people do it in a certain way because that's the way that they would do it, right? And I think those are all mistakes that lead to burnout, lead to frustration. It's when you hear about people that were doing amazing and they had this amazing track record, and then all of a sudden they got that one role, and now their entire perception has changed within the organization, and now it's like, well, we're not sure he's up for this kind of role, and maybe he's not as high potential as we expected, right? But it's about you're almost set up for failure. Now, the way that I think about this is in the book, I talk about the personal board of directors. So throughout your career, there's going to be managers, coaches, someone that kind of looked out for you at a different company that you want to maintain relationships with exactly for this reason. So at some point, you're going to get to a point where you become a manager, you look around and you actually don't have the resources you need to be successful within the company. But hopefully, you've had great bosses that you left on good terms with, at former companies, and you kind of maintain a general relationship of like, hey, here's what I'm up to. Maybe you connect with them once a year. But now is the time to go to them and say, I need some coaching, I need some mentorship. And it's trusted relationship. It's someone that doesn't have any skin in the game. They're not at the company. They have no vested interest except wanting you to succeed. And those individuals, that personal board of directors, if you're intentional throughout your career of building 2, 3, 4, 5 people, those individual conversations can be really meaningful. They can point you to books. They can point you to, have you joined this network association of young line leaders? I don't know, right? But all of these resources are out there, and most of the time people just can't find them. Once you do that, then it's a matter of signaling to your manager that what you intend to work on. So if you are really working on people development and having better coaching conversations with your team, let your manager know that and let them know what you're trying with your team so that they see the effort, right? Because one, they might notice, well, I should be helping him out. He's going outside to his group of, board of directors to try to figure this out. It's like, maybe I should play a better role. And then there might be a opportunity to kind of have a conversation with, should HR have a management training program? Should we do things? But you can't wait for the organization to always serve you up a platter of every resource you need. But the personal board of directors I've seen work really well.
All right. So, I talk to a lot of people that are in the people space, leadership space, and talent reviews. I feel like the idea of talent reviews in theory are great, but in practice rarely really help anyone. And you talk about how, you mentioned perception and talent reviews matter. Well, maybe you agree or disagree with me. The idea of talent reviews now, are people doing them right? And is it really and how does it play along in this when you're hacking this curve, when we're trying to get through this system that's probably not perfect, but it's what we got?
Yeah, look, I do think that organizations that don't prioritize talent reviews, you'll immediately have a workforce and employee kind of base that doesn't feel appreciated and doesn't know where they're going in their career, right? And the people that are the high potential talent, when they don't see direction or clarity of where they're going in their career, they're going to be the first ones to walk out the door. And the ones that don't care are the ones that are left, but those aren't necessarily the ones that are going to grow your business and really allow you to be incredibly successful. So I think theoretically, the role of talent reviews is incredibly important because you got to identify who your top talent are within the organization. Once you identify them, you got to give them differentiated development plans, really accelerate them, nurture them. And then everyone else, you got to have some baseline level of development, right? So AI might disrupt an industry. You better kind of inform your employees or start to think about how do you upskill them so that your company stays relevant, right? Now, I think where the jadedness comes from is whether or not quality of those talent discussions are effectively on par across companies, and they're not, right? Some are doing it just as a checkbox exercise. And this is
Right.
why the role of your manager matters so much. Now, you can't control who your manager is a lot of times. You go into a team, your manager's there, but what you can control is what their perception of you is. And this is why hacking the corporate learning curve, a lot of it has to do with signaling to your manager what you're working on, showing them how you learned something when you delivered it. If there was a lesson learned or a failure, that you show not only your manager how you learn from it, but then actually ask an opportunity to be able to educate the rest of the team that I ran into this issue and this is what happened so that no one else deals with it, right? When a manager gets all of that, even if they're poor at communicating, they will still give you a ton of credit in terms of what you bring to the table versus your peer set. And if your peer set is not going out of their way to educate your manager about that, then what's going to happen is when it comes time to describe four different people on that person's team, they're going to naturally spend probably more amount of their time allocated to you because they just have more talking points on you, right? And if you're a poor manager, you can tell because they will describe four people identically. Like they all get their work done. They, really good team, members. It's kind of these generic statements that mean nothing. And this is where talent review kind of falls apart because when you have a manager that represents you like that, the rest of the group just says, okay, everything's good, status quo, let's move on, let's talk to the next team, as
Right.
opposed to your manager says, this one person seems more high potential than others. I think we got to figure out what we're going to do with them because they're so talented. There's a chance they might leave the organization at some point. That's a very different conversation, and that's what talent review should be used for, right? But so much of it hinges on managers that you're not in the room. So then it's all about training them, educating them, kind of, the little tips and tricks of what a one-on-one looks like with them, how you structure it, how you kind of train them to learn about you, and then they can go in and have a really robust explanation of you. But you're right, like people are jaded.
That runs very parallel, just in, by the way, to the idea of interviews, right? Job interviews when people are being, looking for jobs. Sometimes the people that are doing the job interviews don't ask the right questions. And the same can be said with these talent reviews. And it always comes down to these people are not prepared for it. So, someone could be a great HR leader running a good HR company, but they may not know the right questions to ask the person. And the same could be for the manager doing these reviews. They could be a great manager, but when it comes to talent review time, they don't know actually what to say. Obviously, when you have the high performer, it's pretty it's pretty easy, but not everyone's going to be that A player. So how do we train folks to ask those right questions, to have the right interactions during those talent reviews?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is understanding what your organization needs. So when you come back to the self awareness of, okay, this is what my team is structured like, this is what I'm lacking in terms of a skill set. So when I go out into the marketplace, I'm very deliberate about the kind of talent that I'm looking for. I think a lot of times people are so busy and they're doing the day job and then they got to go interview and they got to go do some other stuff. They don't do the prep necessary to have the quality conversation. So look, I think interviewing is not a perfect skill set. It's always going to be up to interpretation. And look, there's a little bit of this person feels and sounds a little bit like me. So I kind of like that. So I have a preference to bring this
Right.
person into the organization. I think the most important thing is you try to your best to find the right talent, but once you come in, you set them up for success. So you got to overcompensate. You got to give them the resources they need, or if you're on the other side and you're coming into an organization, be very clear. Here's my management style. Here's what makes me most effective at work. Giving me the autonomy to do jobs or giving me these resources at the very beginning is going to be key. But then at the end of the day, you might not be in the right place and you may not have hired the right person. And then it's a matter of you got to call it. You can't let that go too long, right? And it's painful, and you gotta kind of, point at yourself and say, I either brought the wrong person in, or, hey, I signed a contract for a company that I don't really agree with now. And you got to, cut those ties, or else it's going to fester, and it's going to fester very quickly.
All right, so it's just, and I know the first hack for people to hack their way up the learning curve is to buy the book, but I want to give some people some actionable to do. So, if someone wants to accelerate their career over the next 12 months, what are like the top one or two actions they can start tomorrow? Obviously, step one is buying the book, but tomorrow, if they wanted to put something in action, just in what can they do?
Look, regardless of the book, like, here's the answers, right? And if you enjoy some personal stories, get the book. I think the first thing is, one, really understand your enterprise priorities. So if we think about town hall meetings, and we think about those corporate events where everyone comes together and you hear from the CEO or the president, and they're talking about, here's the biggest company initiatives, most people tune out or start texting their friends, or start thinking about that meeting that they have after this. And town halls are almost seen as this opportunity to take a breath and just kind of relax. I think that's the biggest miss for most people, because that is where the answers to the test are shared, right? If you think about your president is sitting up there telling you about the four priorities that are going to be the most important thing, that's where the resources are going to go. That's where the budget and the money is going to be spent. And if you're looking at your list of projects and not a single one of them ladders up to those initiatives that they were describing, you might be working on the wrong stuff, which means when they describe what you delivered and the performance that you made on that, it's going to be an irrelevant topic, right? Because it's like, oh, that's fantastic, but what about the four things we said were the priorities for the year? Well, he doesn't work on those things. It's like, okay, well, that's fine then. So I think the first thing is, when you're in those company town halls, those big quarterly calls, whatever you want to call them, really take notice of how the strategy for the company is changing, and what are the things that the leadership is saying is the most important things to get done. And then go back to your desk, look at your list of projects, and ask your manager, how do I work on things? Or ask for the education of connecting the dots of your project to those enterprise priorities. So that should be the first thing. If there's anything you're working on that's not on that list, finish it as soon as possible and move off of it. And ask your manager for initiatives that align to that, because naturally now you're in the pipeline of the people that work on the things that matter at the company. I think the second thing is, when you think about your development plan and when you think about growing your career, the vast majority of people think about their development gaps. So they think about what they're missing in their organization, or, here's the skill set that I'm lacking, or here's what I need to improve upon. But very rarely do people identify their strengths and try to double or triple down on things that they're good at, because they assume they're good at it. So why do I need to further develop myself? But it's the misnomer that, you can spend a year trying to develop a core development area, and maybe you get it from a 50% to like a 68%. But think about the impact of a strength that's at 90 and you get it to 100. And now you're becoming the role model for that strength, and it almost overpowers your development gaps. So what I always tell people is, yeah, you could work on your development gaps. Now, look, if you're in accounting and you can't do math, like, you need to work on that, right? Like, let's always assume you have the basic skill set for the job. But if your strengths are in influencing, building relationships, maybe it's presentations is what you're really good at, you should not be a number cruncher, and you should not be sitting in Excel all day and trying to generate reports for everyone else to do the presentation. If you're going to pull together the data, ask the manager to also present it. Right. And now you're starting to leverage your strengths to kind of have a better perception within that. So those are the two big ones. Understand your enterprise perspectives, build and double down on your strengths, not your weaknesses. The last one I would say is, don't underestimate the importance of building relationships very early in your career. I think we all have this tendency of being heads down when we're young, and it's all about, I was assigned this project, I'm going to get it done as soon as possible, and I'm going to try to knock it out. And these days, it might be pulling up ChatGPT or Claude, asking a couple of questions and trying to accelerate the impact. When people deliver projects in isolation, it very rarely meets the needs of the organization. So it's not about how quickly you get your job done. It's going and talking to the supply chain organization, talking to finance, asking them about their perception of your project, because there's a lot of stuff that's happening with in terms of the organization and how different departments think about certain projects that you need to have context for before you give a solution. because you can easily do it in isolation. You could sit down on a piece of paper and be like, here's the problem. Here's what I'm trying to solve. I'm going to figure it all out by myself. And I'm going to use a little bit of AI and kind of fill in the gaps here. And then I'm going to present this beautiful recommendation to your manager. And then your manager is going to be like, have you talked to this group? Well, this department has a major role in what you're saying. Are they signed up for this? And then all of a sudden, if you're young, you're like, oh no, I didn't talk to anybody. It's, so I think that's probably the third and last one that I'll share in terms of you need to be able to build strong relationships so that you can actually show your ideas and present your work and get their builds. Because now you go to your manager and they ask the same question. It's like, yeah, Bob from operations is completely on board, and actually sales has been asking for something like this for a couple of years now, and they said they think this is the right way. And now all of a sudden your solution is not just yours, it's like multi-department signed off kind of thing, right? And it's all a matter of just having the right conversations early enough.
It's good stuff. You can read all about it in Hack the Corporate Learning Curve, Strategic Personal Branding that Gets You Noticed and Promoted. Is Jissan Cherian. Jissan, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Joe. I really enjoyed the conversation, so thank you for the opportunity.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Jissan and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.